This chapter in the Cournoyer workbook is a good connection, I think, between the learning unit that we're leaving and the ones we're heading into in the weeks ahead. This chapter really kind of focuses upon some of the skills you'll use in your work with your clients, no matter what the type of relationship is or what the agency setting is in which you're working, whether it's private practice or with an agency, whether it's a public or private organization. These skills are also covered in future lessons in some of the other books, but in different ways and looking at it from different perspectives. And so consider this to be both a link to the lessons in the past as well as an introduction to some of the things that we'll be talking about in the remaining weeks of the semester. Cournoyer lists a number of different techniques that workers employ in their interactions with clients in order to get them working and keep them working on towards their goals that they have established. These are different skills that can be used to keep the client focused upon the work and to be able to approach the tasks that the clients have in an effective manner. So the first skill that they're talking about here is rehearsing action steps, and this is something that is generally done, not always, but generally done between the worker and the client, or with the worker and the client together. And in this particular rehearsal, what the worker is doing is preparing the client to carry out the tasks that are to be accomplished in the next week or two, whatever time period you're looking at. And in rehearsing these steps, the idea is that it gives the client an opportunity to identify any kind of, first of all, any kind of personal obstacles they may experience, whether it's a high level of anxiety or fears or questions or a lack of understanding about what they're supposed to do, as well as to contemplate the environmental obstacles that might be out there that will interfere in achieving the task. So this is kind of looking ahead and kind of seeing what are the things that might get in the way. How is the client going to react to this task, and what are the odds of success? In rehearsing these action steps helps the client to reduce anxiety and maybe gives them a little more motivation as they begin to see that they may actually be able to accomplish the things that are set out for them to accomplish. And it also increases the probability the task is going to be undertaken. Now, you can rehearse these things in role plays. You can rehearse these things. Actually, the client can go out and rehearse it in real life and come back and talk about it, but with other people. But you may be able to do that in your meeting with your client through role plays. The client may also be able to rehearse it in their own mind, just with you describing the situation and the client picturing himself or herself in that situation and making note of their feelings and reactions and things to that rehearsal. Now, there's all sorts of methods that are suggested here in the workbook, including modeling, where you as the worker himself or herself actually demonstrates with the client, kind of in a role reversal kind of thing, how it is that the client might approach the particular task. Role playing, guided practice generally, well, it can be a live practice, but can also be something that is done in the imagination, so to speak. The visualization techniques and things like this. So the idea is that the client's going to be able to carry these tasks out in the natural environment more effectively because of this rehearsal. When a client can't attempt a portion of an action step, this is the time to kind of review those steps carefully, to kind of analyze them and split them apart. And doing so is going to give the client the opportunity to be more successful in the future as well. Now, one of the things you might do here is, we were talking recently in the Gambrel text about task analysis, and this may be a time for a task analysis to break down what the task is that the client has to work through into smaller pieces and try to determine where this, either if it's a lack of skills or whether it's an excessive anxiety or whatever it is, where that's occurring at one particular step, and address that. If it is an anxiety issue, there's different kinds of things that you can do to perhaps help the client reduce the anxiety, such as a behavioral technique known as systematic desensitization, where you have what amounts to a successive approximations of the task, and help the client work through their anxiety at each step along the way as they eventually are engaging in the task more successfully without the level of anxiety. And there are other behavioral techniques that can be used as well. Visualization is another great technique to reduce anxiety. But whether it's anxiety or skills that are lacking, this is the time to look at this if a client's not able to move forward with the step. And this, involves adopting an attitude of what the workbook refers to as supportive curiosity. When the client is successful in taking their action steps, you give lots of praise and applause for that, and maybe while you're asking about the factors that helped accomplish the task, you show some curiosity in that and encourage the client to identify the kinds of things that they utilized in accomplishing the task. This is something that helps them learn how to do that successfully again in the future. And by all means, if the client fails at the task, you should always, of course, avoid showing displeasure or disappointment with the client, but instead, encourage the client to communicate their experiences so they can identify what the factors were that intruded, and again, look for ways to help them learn how to overcome those factors. Progress evaluation is something we talk about throughout the semester, and it really involves the client in reviewing his or her progress towards goal attainment. And there are a number of different ways that you can chart and gauge progress. The workbook has some ideas in here that include things like goal attainment skills and frequency counts, subjective ratings, those self-anchored scales, those kinds of things. Depending again upon what your goal is in achieving that is to be achieved, there's a number of different scales you can use, and frequent use of these scales helps the client to see that there's improvement, or helps you both to see that improvement isn't occurring like you want to, and then gives you an opportunity to go back and kind of figure out what's going on and what's blocking the improvement you're looking for. Again, helps the client to identify factors contributing to progress and to analyze what's intruding in progress when there's no evidence of progress that you want. And if the problems get worse in the course of the work, then it is time for you to sit down and kind of take a close look at what the goal is, whether it's achievable or not, and basically to reanalyze the whole thing and look at maybe antecedents and consequences of the problem behaviors, and see the kinds of things that are intruding in progress. Sometimes the family system around the client is resistant to the progress that the client is making because it upsets the balance of things in their relationships. And so sometimes you'll find that problems exist where you least expect them. Focusing is a skill that's used to direct or maintain attention to the work at hand, and there are a number of different reasons why you might want to use this. For instance, when clients, and this will occur often enough, when the clients interrupt whatever's going on between the two of you or within your work with some unproductive sort of diversion, and then you want to redirect the energy back to the topic at hand. So something like, can you put that idea on hold for now? I'd like to get back to what we were talking about. Just an assertive but gentle and supportive kind of way of kind of refocusing the client back to the topic at hand. Oftentimes these diversions are things that really intrude upon progress, and not necessarily intentional in nature, but repetitive enough that you begin to see that the diversions have something to do with the lack of progress and change. And so you just want to make sure that these diversions don't take you entirely off track and you lose your focus in your meeting with the client. Another time you might use focusing skills is when the client misses the significance of something that's going on related to the goal, right in front of you more or less, and you want to kind of direct their attention to this so they see something that they're missing. I notice that whenever Tina begins to talk about her feelings, mom turns the conversation to her behavior, and that this happens from time to time. What do you think about that? What do you suppose that's about? And so mom is, because she's changing the subject, she really doesn't want to deal with Tina's feeling. Tina has a need to express, and so the workers trying to keep the conversation to where Tina can make some progress and mom doesn't intrude upon that progress inadvertently. So focusing is a skill that is very helpful in when you know where your goal is, where the client's goal is for the meeting, and you want to kind of keep that client from moving off of that goal. It really helps in redirecting energy towards the relevant topic and to keep the attention on the targeted problems and goals. Educating and advising. So educating is necessary when a client needs some information that might help in goal achievement. And there's different kinds of ways that you become a teacher in your interactions with clients, and you might be providing factual information. Just you might have some folders or something you're giving to your clients, to read about a particular issue, or it may be that you're just teaching them certain things about the kind of situation they're in or the problem they're presenting with or whatever, so that they understand a little bit better. Especially with teenagers, that deductive reasoning. Remember, adolescents are entering into that period of formal operations, and they really kind of like this newfound skill. They like to play with that skill, and so deductive reasoning sometimes can be something that's very useful with teenagers, in particular if you've got a teenager that is in formal operations and is willing to work through things in that way. Storytelling and use of metaphors, and particularly in traditional cultures such as many Alaska Native cultures, storytelling is it's one way that history is passed along through oral means, in some respects more than written history. But storytelling itself is a way to bring about a point, and is often a way that can be used to engage a client in bringing a point home with a client, I suppose. And self-disclosure again, where you kind of use yourself as an example of someone who has gone through something or experienced such and such, and but this again needs to be accomplished using proper boundaries, and you don't want to do that too often, nor do you want to make it too long, because this isn't about you, and it should never be in a spot where you wind up putting yourself. I think the workbook talks about becoming the client's client, so to speak. You don't want to put too much emphasis on your own experience or your own difficulties and working through things. You want to place the emphasis upon maybe what you did to overcome it and move on from that. Always we want to allow our clients to consider how relevant this information is to them anytime you're educating. Decide whether to accept it or not. When we did parent education classes in the behavior treatment program that I worked in years ago in Orlando, we had a regular kind of package that we presented to parents that logically flowed from one lesson or one skill to another, so that they could take this all home. And as a total package, ideally, they take the total package home and they change their parenting style and everybody lives happily ever after. Well, of course, it doesn't work that way for a number of different reasons, and particularly because these teenagers we were working with were with us largely involuntarily. When the parents then find out that the court expects them to participate, because they're used to the teenager being the identified problem, when the parents find out that the court's going to expect them to participate in treatment with their kids, some parents don't like that, particularly the education aspect. And so something I used to always tell the parents is that, you have your own wisdom and your own experience. And first of all, you have some things that you can contribute in the class. And so I always solicited ideas from the parents at all, so that they knew I at the time I didn't have any children and I was pretty young, and they all knew that. And so I wanted them to know that I was willing to hear from them what ideas they had and what worked and what didn't work. But the other thing was that I would tell them that this is a package. There's some things in here that you're going to relate to, some things you won't relate to, and those pieces that make sense to you, I want you to take home and try it out and see if you can incorporate it into your own style, so that they weren't expected to graduate reformed, so to speak, in parenting, but to take bits and pieces of what made sense to them home with them. And that's kind of what this is talking about, I think. Some stuff that when we're providing education, some stuff just doesn't connect for our clients and others do. And so those are the things we want to emphasize. That's the important stuff for them to make use of. And then it also talks about educating among organizations and communities in the different ways that we do that, whether it's through writing articles for in papers to be published, or whether it's through social media, or whether you attend meetings and give presentations in meetings and things like that. Advising, I kind of combine on the slide, Jib. Advice is something that I remember I had an instructor, in fact, who said that if he ever caught us giving advice to a client, he was going to fail us in our field placement. That was my field instructor, or the field placement instructor, I suppose. That the belief generally is that this, we shouldn't be telling clients what our solution is for things. The client should be finding their own solution, because the solutions, generally speaking, are within them, and what our job is to help draw out those solutions, help them find their own answers, so to speak. And so advice giving kind of shortcuts that, and it makes you out to be the expert, them the person that doesn't know what they're doing, and we just want to avoid that if we can. There are times when you're going to have to give advice, in crisis situations, emergent situations, perhaps, things like that. Or if you have a particularly strong relationship with your client, and again, I want to stress, not one where you're the answer to everything, but one where they know when to turn to you for some ideas, and they know when to act on their own. And there are times when advice giving isn't totally out of the question, but it really should be kept to a minimum, I think. We don't give advice based on our own feelings or preferences and things like that. It's what matters to the client that's most important. Clients should always feel free to reject our ideas, and our advice should be real specific. And again, I say limited. Responding with immediacy. Now, this is really talking about, I think the term is a gestalt kind of a thing of what is going on in the interaction between you and your client, and you're exploring the client's thoughts and feelings about the worker, so to speak, and perhaps sharing your own thoughts and feelings about your interaction with the client as well. So doing this promotes honesty and authenticity in both not only the client, but also in your relationship. And sometimes when there are issues between the two of you, or among you, if there's more than two people in this interaction, it helps identify those issues, and helps the client come to understand how that interaction, there are patterns in the interactions between us. And if it's done well, done properly, done at the right time, it can really improve the relationship between the worker and the client. So the example here is, right now I can see by your facial expression that you're disappointed that I didn't support your decision more strongly with your parents. Am I right about that? Tentative also, I think this is sort of an interpretation, but it also is feeding back what you're seeing with this is an adolescent, probably, what you're seeing with this adolescent, and through his facial expression and overall demeanor, and that there were some expectations in you. And it's important that the client be able to talk that over with you, rather than kind of bury it and move on. Not appropriate for all clients in all situations. Again, as it was suggested earlier, I think if there is a good strong rapport established between you and the client, it's better to use it in those situations, and not if you don't really have a good relationship established just yet. You should ask yourself whether the client's reaction or thoughts or feelings or whatever it is that you're looking at are really relevant to achieving the goal. This is sort of a comment on the process between the two of you, and sometimes the work you're doing, or the nature of your work, the setting you're doing it in, your role with the client, process really isn't that critical, or it doesn't really address the goal, so to speak. Other times it is much more important, and that's the other thing is the style or the type of intervention you use. Is it one that really leans on the worker-client relationship to a certain extent? And I think probably most of our interactions do, but not all do. Whenever, again, avoid use of judgmental terms. Stick to things you can observe when you make use of this response or this technique. Reframing messages, where you use your own words and actions really to kind of introduce a new way of seeing a particular situation to your client. So if a client has some sort of perception or attitude about something going on in their life that perhaps is a roadblock in the work in terms of progress, then this is a good time to reframe a behavior. Now, here's an example of reframing a negative into a positive, where your client can develop a better understanding of themselves. What you describe as indecisive looks to me to be your ability to see different points of view. Now, the client's complaining about feeling indecisive, not being able to make a decision, and is critical of self because of that. And what the worker is doing here in that statement is helping the client to see that there are positive features to this. It's not necessarily a negative; it is a positive, in that you can see things from different perspectives. So the question is going to be not so much how you become more decisive as how you sort through those different perspectives. It gives them a more positive sense of themselves. Thinking again about an adolescent, and maybe an adolescent, you have a parents who are dealing with an adolescent who is constantly contradicting things that they say and taking issue with what they say to him or her, and rather than focusing upon this child being impossible to parent, instead of reframing of that could be that we raise our kids to become independent thinkers and to make decisions on their own. And can you see how Mary is really establishing her independence here by stepping away from what you believe and telling you what she believes, taking what is perceived as a negative and perhaps attributing some positive qualities to it that is connected to things that the parents want. That's a reframe, a negative into a positive. And then there's personalizing meaning and situalizing those meanings, so that on the one hand, the client is encouraged to accept responsibility for affecting change, so that instead of, as this situation here, instead of blaming the program or blaming the field placement for not getting a good grade, it's just impossible to get through this program. Instead, the worker changes that perception into you're disappointed in yourself because you believe you could do better and you're afraid you're not going to graduate. So that kind of shifts the responsibility from external forces to internal responsibility. That's an important technique and a powerful technique. And situalizing the meaning, situationalizing, I should say, the meaning. The client learns to expand. This is sort of the opposite. It learns to expand the perspective by reducing instances of guilt, shame, self-blame, or whatever. Even the most well-adjusted person will feel out of sorts after they lost a job and don't have an alternative available to them. Yes, you've been in a rotten mood, and it's unfortunate for that, but it's understandable given your situation. It just kind of lightens the load a little bit and helps the client see this is kind of a more normal response to a great deal of stressors. This is in part, this is what we call normalizing things and universalizing things. Lots of people feel this way in your situation, that you're not the only person who would react this way. Another skill that the workbook talks about is observing inconsistencies, where you're pointing out the discrepancies and inconsistencies, contradictions between what the client is saying and what the client is doing, or what the client describes as the client's feelings and their actions. So you really kind of encourage him or her to look at the incongruence in those aspects of their life. Now, it can be used really in any kind of intervention, but as you know, we've talked about this previously as a hallmark tool in the motivational interviewing technique. So it is one way to, I think, to help encourage your clients to progress in their understanding of the conflicts within themselves and maybe move to a higher level, to move to a higher stage of change, so to speak. So when you're telling me that you want to quit drinking, and I believe that, but you also just described going out partying with your friends last night. So how does that fit? You know, what you're saying you want to do and what you're actually doing are two different things. So how do you make that connection? What are you going to do about that? Is the implication. Now you have to do this in a supportive fashion. You don't display irritation or annoyance with it. You're very well supportive and peaceful in bringing this, providing this to the client. Now it does. The contradiction is certainly going to stir up some things inside the client, and you want to make sure the client has the psychological resources to deal with that disequilibrium that comes from this intervention. And I would also say that this is a style of confrontation. Again, it's a supportive confrontation, but it is a confrontation of contradictions. And so you want to make sure that you have a relationship that can deal with those confrontations. You could lose a client if you do this too soon, I think, when they're not ready to see the inconsistencies. But if you have a good, strong relationship with your client, then this is a powerful technique. Representing and linking. So this is a little bit different in that we're really not talking about so much. I mean, it is, but mostly you're talking not an interaction between you and your client or client family, but more about the client and the world. And so you're representing, your client. You're acting on behalf of your client in pursuit of agreed upon goals. You're advocating or whatever you're doing here. This does require you to be assertive and again, not aggressive, but assertive. So that you don't turn people away from whatever service or benefit the client needs, but that you do stand for your client in trying to achieve necessary services. So fits into your role as a broker or case advocate or a mediator, depending upon the situation and the circumstance. This is one where particularly again because you're representing the client to other people, you want to make sure that you have their informed consent. And likewise, this is true for linking, where really what you're doing here is trying to connect and restore connections between two people or between your client and groups, or to establish an initial connection between your client and another agency or another provider, those kinds of things. Particularly in helping the client establish or reconnect connections with other people, it really kind of helps them improve communication skills, because you're going to be working with them some to well, perhaps if there had been a falling out with another person or something like this, you're going to work with them to kind of help find a way to address that and to help set it behind them, so to speak, so that they have a better relationship once again going forward. This is also something that can be used to establish collaboration with two groups in a community as well. If you're working with a neighborhood where you need different groups of people coming together to establish resources or to advocate for resources. Pointing out endings. We talked about this some when in our looking at child protection services and things like that throughout the semester. That the clients have 15 that if well, first of all, the federal regulations now mandate that children in out-of-home care be in a permanent living arrangement within 24 months of removal from the home. And so that could be a return to the home. It could be placement in a guardianship situation. It could be an adoption, but it does mean that they're not in temporary foster care for longer than 24 months. So what that means for parents is that you just can't go on and on and on here and working on your goals and not really making a lot of progress, that you have a timeline, you have time frames within which you have to achieve these goals. And now there are ways to, without getting into policy, there are ways to get exceptions to that when it's necessary, but the overall idea is we're not going to drag this out forever, because the objective is a permanent living arrangement for the child. It is not to give the adult 5 or 6 years to pull themselves together for their kid. So this time frame is, while on one hand it appears to be limiting and perhaps harsh to some individuals, particularly those that are suffering from serious issues like with addiction and things like this. On the other hand, it's a motivating factor. I don't know about you, but when I have a deadline, I seem to be able to focus myself more and to get things done more quickly, more efficiently than if I can, get things done whenever. And that's what this time frame thing is all about. So you have time frames in your case plans, and usually they're a very important part of the goal setting. They can also be used to measure progress as to, whether or not something's been achieved within a time frame that is expected to be. And as I said, it can be very important when in motivating clients to achieve a goal. Clients also, when you talk about pointing out endings, of course, we're also talking about the end of the relationship with the worker. And so just kind of reminding clients that, we have, let's say if you're in a therapeutic treatment relationship at the mental health center and an employee assistance program, and you have 8 sessions to achieve your work, and so you're at session 5, and you just want to remind the client that we only have 3 more meetings after this, so let's look at where we're at with your goals, and if we need to change our focus any or redouble our efforts in any areas. But also it gives clients an opportunity to begin to prepare psychologically, emotionally for the separation from you, and it is something that very often is a more difficult process for the client than you might imagine. And so it's good to just kind of keep that ending in mind, and to gently prepare the client for that ending, whether it's because you're terminating services or transferring to another worker, or you're leaving. Well, that would be a transfer also. And also during the meeting, I think keeping an eye on the clock, so to speak. If you don't have all day generally whenever you sit down with the client, and so I used to like to tell clients, well, at the mental health center, you have essentially the 50-minute hour. If you have a traditional sit-down kind of therapy relationship, so to speak. I mean, when you're doing work in groups, there's a beginning and end time, and some activity therapy is more open-ended, but generally speaking, there's a time limit there. And when you're making home visits, so whether you're working for a community organization, or whatever, if you're meeting with a client in a prison setting or a substance abuse client or whatever, there's generally a beginning and end time. And so you keep an eye on the clock, and I think be sure that the client has some sense of where you're at in your time as well, because that keeps him or her focused on the goal. There's kind of a joke. It used to be I know at the mental health center what they call Doorknob Therapy, where you keep encouraging the client to get to the point where they're touching on an important issue, and they resist it, and they divert, and you refocus, and they divert again, and you refocus again, those things. And then when they get up at the end of the hour and they go and they're ready to touch the doorknob, and that's when they drop the bomb, or they say something really important. And the reason for that is because they want to get something off their chest to you. They want to tell you about something, but they don't want to deal with whatever it is has to be dealt with. And you'll see that a lot too. But that's where pointing out endings isn't always, the ending isn't always what you want it to be, so to speak. But hopefully the more the client's aware of the fact that we have limits to whatever it is you have to accomplish, or what it is we're going to do today, the more likely it is they're going to be able to focus and get things done. And finally, a couple of slides once again about recording. And Cournoyer points out that your records really are a legal and ethical obligation, and there's certainly a lot of truth to that. It's very important that that the records be kept carefully and professionally. Sometimes your records, no matter where you work, your records are going to be reviewed by other people, almost always. Sometimes they're going to become a part of a legal record or a medical record, something that might follow the client and follow the client for years and years afterwards. People may be pulling your record or pulling your assessment or pulling your court report or your substance abuse evaluation or whatever it is, and reading that many years later, and people are going to give this credibility. So it's very important that you are wise when you keep your records. Um, so here again, some of the same things about having a rationale for the action you take, describe the phenomena, keep your subjective feelings out of it, keep it focused upon observations and objective things as much as possible. Now there are different methods of recording that, depending upon where you work, it's going to use a different style or technique for recording. I already talked about the SOAP format, which is what is used a lot of times at agencies where, particularly where insurance companies are, going to be billed for services and things like this. Insurance companies like the SOAP format, and it's got a kind of sort of a medical kind of a origin to it. A lot of times, emergency room reports and doctor's reports sometimes will have the SOAP format as well. So it does imply that kind of client as patient thing. But there are other methods as well. And so again, that's I'm not going to go into all the different parts of each of them. They're in the workbook for you if you want to look at them. But remember, these are legal documents. They should be written legibly and understandably and timely. Um, Include descriptive and factual information that pertains to the purposes and goals for the work. Keep extraneous comments and thoughts out of them. Um, be sure that they're accurate, objective, unbiased. While you want to maintain the confidentiality rights of third parties, identify the sources of information and support the reasons for decisions and actions. People will call you up and tell you things sometimes, and there are some situations where you're not going to want to have their identity revealed for various reasons that I won't go into here, but just keep keep the privacy rights of those individuals in mind as well as when you make records. And be sure that your document complies with legal and agency policies. And just something I want to mention before I leave, in this new age of you know electronic communication and everything, I, with some chagrin, was supervising people and observing the emergence of text messaging between workers and clients as one method of communication. And there are reasons for that. Sometimes the workers don't take phone calls because they're busy, and clients find that they can get a quicker response by texting a worker, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, that's just one reason why. But also, it's just become sort of a way of communicating now that that we have to learn how to incorporate all this into our practice, I suppose. But something to keep in mind is that text messages on your phones and tablets, they're still part of the agency record, and how you get them into the record, I don't know. Whether you print out your text messages or whether you transcribe them or what, but they should be in your record. And understand that when you start putting text messages, when you're communicating with your client that way, that really can make your phone or your tablet subject to subpoena in court if you're working with clients in a way that could wind up. I keep thinking about child protection, and a lot of you will be working in the criminal justice system and substance abuse, that kind of thing, where your records may be subpoenaed. These kinds of things wind up in those records or should be in those records, and that could mean that your phone is taken and looked through as a by the other side. And so just be aware of this, and don't be too casual about how you how you communicate with your clients. Keep it as professional as possible. Okay, that said, that's once again ending on a kind of a cautionary note, and I don't always like ending our talks that way, but well, that's the way this one ends. So let me know if there's any questions arising from this. As always, we're getting closer to the end of the semester now. You're getting there, so hang in there. We'll be tying things up before you know it. Bye for now.